Well, President Obama announces his financial overhaul plan. What does it mean for the markets and for the economy? Here to talk about that is Joe Fischera, who is the CEO and co-founder of Sabre Partners. I'm Mike Norman, your host, by the way, and welcome to HardAssetsInvestor.com. Joe, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Let me ask you just off the top, before we get into this proposed financial system overhaul, let's talk a little bit about whether or not you think that regulation or the lack of regulation was one of the contributory factors to the financial crisis. Do you think so?
Well, in hindsight, we could always try to say that there was some rule or some rule that was missing, but it doesn't really appear, even in the new proposals, that any specific rule. It really was the will to enforce the existing rules. We had a lot of conversation about, remember in the dot-com days of irrational exuberance and then the knowledges of securities research. And then the whole housing bubble was well discussed well before. People sort of knew kinds of things, but regulators didn't really have the will to step up, because it was almost like, well, why spoil the party?
Right. Well,
and that is the kind of thing. I don't know whether you can ever pass any rule or any regulation that's going to solve everything. It's really the people who enforce them and the political will to actually go in and do different things.
So the question is then, and you sort of alluded to it, will it spoil the party? I mean, if this financial system overhaul, as it's being called, represents a whole new era of regulation, perhaps far greater than what we have seen up until this period. You've been involved directly in even creating some financial instruments. Does this quash innovation? Will we see a negative result as a consequence?
Well, not to be flip about it, but often in economic circles and other places, you'd say that the first rule of regulation is that every regulation will be circumvented in some way, or that will create incentives to circumvent or go around or create other things. So when you put any set of rules in, you're going to create a set of incentives. Some of them will be known, some won't be known, and things will take place. Take, for example, in the 90s, we were upset about corporate pay back then. They put a sort of a $1 million cap, I believe it was, on salaries for deductibility, and that led to the incentive of paying CEOs with stock options, thinking that was going to be more aligning them with shareholders' interests. But we found out later that incentive, trying to control here, created something else over here that was worse than what we were trying to fix. So we have to be very careful that we will be doing exactly the same thing.
Do we need a vast financial sector, at least constituted in the form it is now, where you have a banking sector and then you have enormous amount of intermediation? I remember there was a speech by former Fed Chairman Paul Volcker about a couple of years ago, where he talked about the progress, so to speak, between the 1970s and now, but really what we have seen is a lot of intermediation, but not a whole lot of real added value to the economy. Do you agree with that?
Not necessarily. And Volcker that you bring up shows you an example. He's credited in terms of taming inflation. And why? Because he had the political will of the independence of the chairman to do what needed to be done against all of the forces against him at the time. And that kind of leadership was necessary. I think, we are a large global. This is a globalization issue, financial markets. I think one of the big problems, though, is that it's not just the United States. It needs to be a global answer, because I can see the arguments coming back that sort of were in the 2004, which got us into part of this trouble, was that, if we don't do X, capital will go offshore.
Right.
People will be going over here. We will no longer be the financial capital of the world, and we must be the financial capital of the world. So let's loosen up this, let's loosen up that. And that sort of did lead to the super leverage of the banks from 2004, I believe it was. And if we don't sort of have this whole the rest of our allies on board in terms of that, we will create different incentives, and we will make it work.
Right. So we can't do it unilaterally. It has to be sort of a group effort. But let me just ask you.
Yeah, I mean, we can't, and we have to show the leadership for it. And we also have to be willing to truly punish the people that may have done excesses and done wrong. We haven't really seen that yet, but that's why our allies are sort of like saying this is an American problem.
I want to get into that. We're going to do it on the second interview, but just very quickly, your outlook now, given these possible changes: optimistic, cautious, pessimistic?
Very cautious to pessimistic, only because I'm not sure that the American people truly understand that when the recession ends, which we believe it will end in the next 6 months or so, doesn't mean that we are a return to the times. It's not necessarily going to be this V-shaped, oh, it's over, we flipped a switch. We'll go through a Christmas where we'll still have a double-digit unemployment, and we're probably having a very long, gradual way back. My colleagues at Princeton are talking 10 years. We've heard some other people say 15 years before getting at. And whether the American people really understand and will have the patience, given that we'll have election cycles in between, we'll have desires to see things faster, whether they think that as long as it's moving in the other direction, they'll be patient, I don't know.
All right. Well, cautious to pessimistic. Hopefully we pick up the tone a little bit on that one in the second interview, but we'll have the second interview with my guest, Joe Fischera. In the meantime, stick around, and plenty of great resources on this site. I'm Mike Norman. See you next time. Take care.